and our CISO was asking, who's the person that if somebody had a gun to their head that, would be the biggest risk? And I raised my hand. I said, me or my team, just because we know all the passwords of all the secure devices at power plants and all the different places. And, I don't get paid enough to risk my family and not give away a password to, a system.
You're listening to Protect It All, where Aaron Crow expands the conversation beyond just OT, delving into the interconnected worlds of IT and OT cybersecurity. Get ready for essential strategies and insights. Here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Protect It All podcast. Today, I wanted to dive into kind of blind spot in cyber, and why, OSINT, needs to be, part of your security program. If we really look at, if you haven't worked in the military, you haven't worked with, agencies and, organizations and, other government agencies, all the things, right? OSINT word, could be, a little, opaque in that, we don't necessarily use open source intelligence. Obviously, we're getting data sources from, a lot of our providers that are getting that intelligence. But we're not necessarily using it outside of, your firewall or, maybe the products that have it built in. But if you take a step back and you look at how an attacker is going to, go after someone, an organization, or, even a person, go all the way back to, the old Hackers movie, right? You see the first thing they do is investigate the building and where are they trying to get to and the people that are going into, and they find the weakest link. Somebody they can get their badge from, somebody they can get onto their device, somebody they can steal their phone, somebody that, has a risk in their environment, whether they're having an affair or all this type of stuff, right? That's all information. I remember sitting at an incident response tabletop exercise, and our CISO was asking, who's the person that if somebody had a gun to their head that, would be the biggest risk? And I raised my hand. I said, me or my team. Just because we know all the passwords of all the secure devices at power plants and all the different places. And, I don't get paid enough to risk my family, and not give away a password to, a system. Like, it's just not the case. And, so, it's one of those things that, if you're not thinking about it, it's definitely not the first thing you should do if you're building an OT program or a cybersecurity program. It's not like check one, but it should definitely be something that you're considering. So, most companies build walls, like exterior walls to protect your network. Like in your house, you have a front door. But, the real threat usually is is already, inside, right? It's the insider threat. And I don't mean insider threat like it's you have a, nation state attacker inside your environment you've hired and they're a spy. I literally mean, your employees are bringing things in unknowingly, or they are your risk, right? Sitting in your employees' social media, their home Wi-Fi, like all of those things, you're literally connecting many times. If you're doing BYOD, if they're, using a corporate device, are they plugging that into their home network? Do they have protections on their home network? What other things are on their home network that could be an impact, right? So these are all things that you have to consider when you're building out your program. Like, you look at most attacks, they don't come in the front door. Like the Target attack, again, I know that's an old one, but you look at the Target attack and it came from a third party consultant contractor that had VPN access to the Target network, and they attacked the supplier. They don't attack Target because the front door is barricaded and all the things. They always find the back door access, the easiest way to get in, right? You're going to find the path of least resistance. It's like electricity. So, that's where OSINT and, which is open source intelligence, just FYI, that's where it comes in, right? So, OSINT is, why does it matter, or what does it really mean? OSINT isn't just for investigators or law enforcement or, doing criminal background checks or, tracking down hackers or anything like that, right? It's collection and analysis of publicly available data. social media, forums, dark web chatter, public records, but it's also breach data, right? A lot of times when we're doing an assessment, that's one of the things we're looking at. And we just do a very, very wide spread. And that's going to be, hey, company A, Acme Corporation's domain name has been in this many, releases, and this many accounts have been associated in those things. And there's passwords associated with them, right? That's an example. But I'm not diving into your employee list and saying Aaron Crow, his Facebook account was impacted, and now, or his email or whatever, like all of those things matter, especially if I have access to things, administrator, et cetera, right? So it doesn't mean you necessarily have to have that information on all of your employees, especially if you're a large company. But it's definitely something you need to consider. Executives, not high profile in that like public facing, could be. Obviously, if you have those, that's something to consider. But somebody that has the keys to the kingdom, like somebody that is the administrator, somebody that knows all of those things, there should be a, operational security consideration. And, their accounts shouldn't have domain level access. This is 101 security. My account should not be domain admin. I should have a separate account that's domain admin, and that account should be a different name. It should be a different, password. I should have multi-factor authentication, like all those types of things. And also, I should be monitoring those people's accounts, and I should be monitoring Aaron's devices, and I should have a different set of, expectations for Aaron and whoever has that level of access, to ensure that, nothing bad is happening in that space, right? So, every attacker is going to start with OSINT. They're going to find who is the person or people or team that I would want to infiltrate, or I would need to get a hold of, or pretend to be, or get access to, or be next to be able to get to the thing that I'm looking for. Access to the network, data, whatever that thing may look like, right? And attackers will use OSINT to map your people, your network, your infrastructure, your physical buildings, and that's what they're going to use to find weak links. And it's not that difficult. Like, they are, again, open source. It doesn't cost them anything. Most of this stuff is publicly available, free. Anybody can do it, right? I can search for Aaron's Facebook account. I can search for Aaron's Instagram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And I know where he works. I know his route to work. I know which coffee shop he's eating at. Like, I heard an entrepreneur the other day talking about how he got into, he was starting an airline business, and he wanted to go to this conference, but it was all sold out. So he found where the conference was going to be, and there was one coffee shop outside of that. So he went in that coffee shop that morning and bought every bagel, every bit of food they had, and bought it all and put it in a basket. So when everybody came in to buy, a muffin or whatever, they didn't have any, because he had bought them all out. But then he's like, hey, you guys looking for a bagel? Here you go. You looking for a croissant? Here you go. Right. And it was an introduction for him to be able to talk to them. That's OSINT. Obviously, it wasn't used in a malicious way, but he was very intelligent about where people were going to be, who was going to be there. Everybody was wearing their badge. So he knew the people that he wanted to talk to and the ones that he would just, hand a bagel to. Right. There's no reason why, attackers wouldn't use that same scenario. Most of us, if you go to a corporation, you probably have a badge. That badge probably has your company name on it. They know that you're going into this building. It doesn't take much to figure out who the right people are in that space. So all that to say, that's great. Now what? So what? What do I do with that? Where can OSINT fit into a cyber program? You can integrate OSINT into your risk assessments, into your threat modeling. And again, that's where you say, hey, these key people, we should have an extra level of monitoring. And I don't mean getting into their personal information, but it's more around, hey, I'm going to monitor the dark web to see if any of this type of stuff comes up with Aaron's name attached to it and his accounts. I'm going to monitor those accounts. I'm going to monitor for, anything that is, using Aaron and, the company, right? And there's certain ways that you could do that, again, without breaking into people's personal private information, not trying to recommend anybody dive into people's personal and private information, because everybody wants that privacy in their own home. But at the same time, there is a risk as a person, as an employee, as a worker at company Acme Corporation, that I can bring in unknowingly. Again, as I'm bringing these devices into my network, as I'm going to Starbucks, as I'm traveling, like whatever those things are. So, use it to understand what an attacker can already see about your organization, right? So you should be looking at this. What can I see from the outside looking in, publicly available? Can I find business locations? Can I find, information about who my providers are? Can I find my source? Like, what is the information that I can find? Because that's what the attackers are going to be doing. If I want to go after Acme Corporation, I'm going to start searching, looking at Google and publicly available information to find all of those factors. And what can I use that can benefit me to get me to my goal? But you can't just do it once, right? It's not a static thing. I can't do it once and say, oh, I've already done that search, I'm good, right? There needs to be some level of recurring, component to doing this. Does it need to be daily, hourly? That depends how critical your system is, how critical your environment is, et cetera. But, probably not. But it can't be once, and it shouldn't be annual. It should be more than that, right? Because things are so dynamic and things change so quickly. That information could get leaked in a heartbeat. Every time a leak comes out on the news, it should be almost a triggering factor of, is any of our information in that leak? Or any of our employees' information in that leak? Did they use their corporate address to sign up for Facebook or, Academy or whatever? And maybe they use the same password on their personal accounts as they do their business account. Like these are all just things to consider as you're doing these things, right? So align that monitoring with identity protection, dark web, and then like brand intelligence, right? So, thinking about, making sure nobody's creating fake web accounts or domain names that are similar, acmecorporation.co, acmecorporation.ai, like, Acme spelled differently with a dash or whatever. There's all those types of things that you can monitor for. And all of those things should be kind of red flags of what's going on here, right? Maybe it's not malicious, but it's probably not something I want happening. And then tie all that stuff into your vulnerability management, insider threat, and, kind of executive protection workflows and what that looks like, right? So are you monitoring your executives' stuff? Executive, that word, it's the term that's normally used, but it doesn't have to mean just my C-suite. Again, if you have a person, an Aaron, a Bob, a Sam, somebody that has the keys to the kingdom, you probably want to make sure that you're monitoring their stuff and make sure. And again, I'm not talking about their personal stuff, but just monitoring what's available about their names, their accounts, their systems, their locations, that kind of thing. So kind of what's next is that human attack surface. We all know, anybody that's been in cybersecurity or even technology, the weakest link is always the people. And that's not an insult, but it's just the reality, right? Your most at-risk assets are your people. So, you need to be asking those questions. Is their home network secure? Do they just have, AT&T providers, Wi-Fi, and it's the default credentials and password and the default SSID, and it's a simple SSID, and all their home stuff, all their IoT stuff and stuff that they, their Alexa and their TVs and their smart refrigerator and their smart toaster is on the same network as your corporate device? Because that's probably not what you want, right? Are they using operational security, OPSEC, on personal devices? Obviously, they're probably being intentional on their work devices, but are they also on their home devices? Are they going to sites that are more risky? Are they connecting to Wi-Fi at Starbucks without using a VPN? Do they connect their work laptops to the home Wi-Fi or smart devices? Are they using a VPN for remote access? People post their roles, locations, and projects online. It's on LinkedIn. I know who you work for. Like, it's super easy to track this stuff down. And because it's part of our world today, everybody can look on my LinkedIn and see I work for Morgan Franklin. They can see exactly, what they can link that to what company I'm doing, and maybe they can figure out what clients that Morgan Franklin has, or, whatever that looks like. So these are all things that people can use in this OSINT to find. So making sure that your employees are using OPSEC on not just their corporate devices, but also their work ones. Not even to count, are you using BYOD? Are you allowing people to bring their own devices? And that can be their cell phone. Are they allowed to connect their cell phone to the Wi-Fi? Or do they have their corporate email on their own phones and their laptops and all that type of stuff, right? These are all things to consider, and you need to have policies around those things. So what is the real world impact of this? So OSINT can reveal exposed credentials, open ports. There's all the time hacks and releases going out with credentials and passwords that were released, open ports. There's all sorts of open source portals that have that showcase, open ports and things like that, internal documents that are left on GitHub, policies and procedures, like all sorts of things that get into that you can't imagine how it got there. And many times it's probably accidental. One of my former alma maters, I don't have to name it, but you can look it up, recently just got a SQL database backup released. That was 2 terabytes, I think, of a SQL database. I think it was SQL database. It was the backup, but it wasn't encrypted. So it got access. Who knows what was in it? I don't know. I didn't dive further into it, but it's things like that you just don't realize, or you don't necessarily know at the time that something bad like that is going to happen. And especially as you have more and more and more employees, again, most of the time it's not malicious. Most people are not putting those things out there to be at risk. They just don't know the impact. They put something someplace to make a workaround, and they don't realize that now they just open the keys to the kingdom, or they allowed a bad actor in the door. In executive protection, and again, executive being those high critical type people, OSINT identifies physical and digital threats before they hit, right? You should be monitoring those critical folks to make sure that, they don't have, people tracking them, all the things that you can imagine. And I'm not just talking about the Jason Bourne movies or, that kind of thing. It's really just simple. Like, do they have people monitoring their systems? Do they have people monitoring their activities? Are they watching them? That kind of thing, right? All those things are things that you need to at least be looking at, especially for those highly critical people in your environment. In OT environments, it can uncover, supplier vulnerabilities. LinkedIn posts can reveal control system vendors and versions, and all that can link to, hey, this has got an XP system that can't be patched, and, A plus B equals C, right? So all this to say, it's a big target that is really hard. If you're already struggling in your OT program or your cyber program or your IT program, whatever those things are, thinking about this can be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be, though, right? There's obviously services and consultancies that can help you with this stuff. But just bigger than that, just think about what are some of the entry level small things? Do some of these searches, use some of these open source tools, see what you can find, and see if it's something that's concerning, right? And then what can you do about it? How can you adjust it, shift it, change it, right? Build OSINT capabilities internally, or you can also build them through, again, a consultant, a trusted partner. Start small, focus on high risk groups, those critical folks, executives, admins, developers, systems administrators, plant managers, whatever that type of folks, may be. But you need to understand who those critical people are, just like you're supposed to be mapping out your asset inventory around what are my critical systems. This system is critical. These people are also critical to my system. It's all part of that system and understanding. Because if Bob gets taken, or it gets hit by a bus, let's say that they kidnap him, or they hold him by gunpoint, or they grab his family. Like, these are all things that you just need to think about in these spaces, especially if you start talking about international and all that type of stuff. Like, all of these things just get exponentially worse. Create a process for reporting and removing exposed data. As these alerts are coming out about a new exposure or leak. Proton just released like 300,000. They didn't do the release. They did a study that showed the release of like 300,000 credentials that were exposed. Is any of your people on that list? Do you even have a method that you could search that list to see if any of your people are on that list, your employees, your contractors? The answer more than likely is no. If it is no, that's probably a great place to start. How could I start searching these already disclosed locations and breaches for any of the people in my organization or adjacent to my organization that could potentially impact us. And it could just be as simple as Aaron was in a breach. It was his personal account, but since he was in that breach, we're going to force him to change his password. Simple as that. Aaron, you got to change your password. Make sure that you're using multi-factor authentication. And even if you're using multi-factor authentication, you're going to change your password because your credentials, not your business ones, but your other credentials were in a breach. We're just going to go ahead and do it because it's an easy change, and it can impact things that you don't even know downstream. But making the change is low risk, right? Combine OSINT with training, really teaching employees what oversharing looks like. Talking about business, what their projects are, all of that type of stuff. Like, what are the types of things that they should and shouldn't be talking about, for just the good of the business and the entity, right? But make it continuous, not reactive, right? So it shouldn't just be after something bad happens, we talk about this. It shouldn't just be once a year. It should be something that you're repeating, something that you're keeping in the focus of people, so that every day is something they're considering when they're going into a situation. Hey, when I walk into the Starbucks, I shouldn't be connecting to the Wi-Fi. And if I do, I need to make sure that I have a VPN. And if I don't, then I don't really need to be on the Wi-Fi. And if I'm traveling internationally, I probably don't need to take my work laptop unless I have to be at work. And if I do, I should probably reach out and ask them, which device should I take, or should I connect remotely and set up remote access? And like, all of these are types of questions, but do your employees know that? Or are they going to take a trip because they are going to be over, they've only got 5 days of vacation and the last day is going to be a travel day. So they're going to take their work laptop so they can log into meetings because they don't have another day off. But they're traveling back. So it's not a big deal, right? It's not, as long as you understand what it means and that they're following that OPSEC, right? So, kind of in closing, attackers use OSINT because it works. It's super simple. It's low hanging fruit. Doesn't cost them much. They get a huge return on investment for the time that they spend researching your people, your organization, your systems. And if you're not using it, you're fighting with, one or two hands tied behind your back, right? You don't know the day that you have exposed that attackers can use against you, right? You see the legal, shows or whatever, and everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. It's the same thing in cyber. Everything that you say or someone says or is available can and will be used against you. And that means they're going to take all that information and use it to plot their attack. And it doesn't have to be nation states. It could just be a bored kid. It can be a disgruntled employee. Like, there's any number of use cases where having that information is valid, or would and can be used against you and your program. So build it into your cyber program before someone else builds it against you and takes advantage of it. So, anyways, all that to say, OSINT, it's something we talk about in the cyberspace. It's not always really a part of a program, at least not until it's more mature. But it's such a low-hanging fruit. It really should be incorporated early on, and you can obviously mature that as it goes. But you should be doing basic searches constantly, right? If you're getting an assessment, you should ask for a deep dive of OSINT. You should, depending on the size of your company, you should be giving them your accounts and say, hey, check for anything with these account domain names and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, start doing that. And again, once a year is not enough. So really start incorporating that. Love to hear from anybody that is using OSINT in their programs. How are they using it? What have you found? And maybe some of the things that maybe you've found some holes or some gaps because of that OSINT research, and you've able to make a change to better and strengthen your environment. So with all that, until next time, definitely reach out. Let me know how you're using OSINT in your cyber practice.
Thanks for joining us on Protect It All, where we explore the crossroads of IT and OT cybersecurity. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to stay ahead in this ever-evolving field. Until next time.